I am an African.
Very, very special podcast. Some of you may or may not know Zambia recently passed a new Cyber Security Act, and it basically set social media ablaze. Now, the Zambian government came out and defended itself and said that the reasoning for this act was actually to protect its citizens and also to allow for the stopping of um, online fraud and online cybersecurity crimes. So, this has been a topic of discussion, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Zenge. Zenge, what do you think about this? What's going on?
Yeah. It's a bit crazy how people are reacting to it and everything. And I just really wanted to just get into the flesh of it and what it meant and what's different, because everyone is really like it's extremely like it's just an extremely trending issue now. So it'd be good to look into it.
Yeah, and as always, bringing you the best guests from all over the continent. Today, we are honored to be joined by a leading voice in media, freedom, and journalism in Southern Africa. She is the founder of the Free Press Initiative Zambia, a platform committed to promoting media rights and freedom of expression. She also serves as the Southern Africa correspondent for Committee to Protect Journalists, where she amplifies the voices of journalists and highlights the challenges they face in the region. With a strong background in journalism and a wealth of experience reporting on press freedom issues, she brings a powerful perspective on the importance of independent media and fostering democracy. Welcome, Joan Chirwa, to the show. Joan Chirwa?
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you, Zenge, for the invitation to this very interesting discussion.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for joining us. So, for me, I really wanted to start this discussion with a lot of context because recently, as you can imagine, I didn't know anything about the Cybersecurity Act, the previous ones, or anything. So, it's very interesting to sort of note that this is not a new bill because I think from social media's perspective, it sounded like it just came out of nowhere. And so we had, the is it radio? I forget the name. Radio security, radio. I forget the name, but it was in 1994 during the Chiluba
Radio
era.
Communications Act.
Radio Communications Act. Thank you, Zengi. That's why you're the co-host. And so the Radio Communications Act, and had mainly to do with radio, as you can imagine from the name, mainly with infrastructure, not that much with monitoring, etc. And then in 2021, we sort of see this. I mean, in 2009, there was also an International Information Communication Technology Act, but again, mainly to deal with infrastructure and not to do with monitoring. But in 2021, we see a difference, and we now start to see things like monitoring and also cyber crimes, etc. And in 2025, seems to also be enhanced. So my first question would be, what do you think has since that time from the Radio Communications Act in 1994 till now? What in your view, what has improved and what feels like it's a step backward?
Yeah, I like the fact that you're giving that historical background in
Mhm.
terms of where we're coming from and how the cyber security and cyber crimes laws came into being. Yes, you're right. This is not um, the first time we're having this law. What has happened this year is not the beginning of the Cyber Security or Cyber Crimes Act. Of course, it's something that I think was strengthened in 2021 when we saw the Cyber Crimes and Cyber Security Act being signed into law by President Edgar Lungu that time. Of course, there was a lot of concern even that time, just before the bills were signed into law. We spoke out as civil society representatives, and as for instance, myself as a press freedom advocate, we did raise a number of issues and concerns where we advised that that particular bill was actually being rushed because we needed a lot of time to discuss and ensure that whatever it is that was contained in that law did not go against what the Constitution provides in terms of freedom of expression for our people, which by extension also extends to journalists, which has been my major concern as a journalist myself. But unfortunately, like what we have seen on a number of occasions, whatever concerns we raise don't usually get listened to. Nobody takes them into account, even if there is that process where all stakeholders are asked to make submissions before a parliamentary committee. Unfortunately, that process has sort of uh, existed simply to satisfy the procedures that are there. In short, maybe I can say it's just academic now, because everything else we say never gets accommodated. When we're advised it shouldn't be done in this way, nobody does pay attention. So we still find that whatever proposed laws are shared with us are what we get to see once Parliament passes them and once they get to the President for the signing. So it's the same thing that happened in 2021. We did advise that we needed a lot of time because most of the provisions in there were anti-freedom of expression. And just like what we rightly predicted, we actually warned that this same law will come back to haunt the PF should they find themselves on the other side of power. And of course, that came to pass. And you see a number of people that associated themselves with the PF or still are with the PF um, falling victim to that law. Now comes to the current scenario where we have the UPND in power. Of course, their case is slightly different. Different in the sense that these are people that spoke our language before Edgar Lungu signed that law in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
We all stood and said this is a bad law. And I think if you check on social media, there are quite a lot of posts that the president made that time as an opposition leader. He made
Yeah,
quite a lot of
I think he
posts.
he actually mentioned that that's the first law he was going to repeal. Actually,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. So there is all that's flying around. And it's easy for people to say, hey, look, we're going back again on our way. This is what was promised, but this has not been done.
Mm-hmm.
And them coming into power now has seen a split of that bad law that we had. We said it was bad. He said it was bad. We all agreed it was bad. But then you take a step further by splitting that bad law into two separate bad laws.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's where the concern is, and that's where there is all this uproar and people speaking and saying, why are we doing this?
Mm-hmm.
It's from that perspective that people now are speaking. The promise was we're going to repeal these laws, but then we come into
Precisely.
power, we see something totally different being done. So are we sticking to the word? Definitely not.
Yeah.
Uh, when you see what is contained in those two laws, of course, not that everything like 100% is bad. Definitely not. It's the same
Mm-hmm.
thing that we said even in 2021. We told PF, we told Edgar and his team to say, look, we're not saying that everything is bad in this. There are certain provisions that are okay. For instance, when you talk about child protection, child pornography, the
Mm-hmm.
online kidnapping, human trafficking, all that, those
Mm-hmm.
are progressive provisions. But they have done a mixture where, in the middle of having those good provisions, which we are not against, they bring in some of those provisions that clearly are going to uh, interfere with what the Constitution says. So, why are you going to come up with laws that are going to go against the Constitution, which we know is a supreme law of the land?
Mm-hmm.
So, anything that comes then has to be declared null and void. That's what we know. But then we are going to have all these laws existing which are going against the Constitution, and nobody wants to pay attention to that. Nobody wants to raise issue with that.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at, for instance, uh, Section 22 of the Cyber Crimes Act, now it was a bill, now it's an act, it's a law, and it's enforceable. It
Mm-hmm.
talks about
This is
criminalizing.
about the interception one.
No, now that's for the cyber security.
Oh, okay.
22 that I'm talking about now is in the cyber crimes, which talks about section 22, subsection 2, that talks about
Mm-hmm.
publication false material. Now
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot that gets shared. Now someone will decide, depending on what it is that is published, if of course it makes someone unhappy, you find that law enforcement agencies might come for you. It might be true, but because it has unsettled someone, they might brand it false. It can be an individual citizen, it can be a media house, it can be a civil society organization, unfortunately. So they can come and say you published something false, even when they know deep down their hearts that that is actually correct and it's not false. But because it might unsettle them, ultimately what that is going to do is you will not see much of investigative reporting. It may probably just be on one side where oh, this has nothing to do with the government, because anything that
Mm.
concerns the government, one will sort of begin to apply some caution. What we will
So,
see is a lot of
Yeah, I think.
self-censorship, not just
I,
in media, but even citizens. So you fail to express yourself. Then ultimately, it takes us back to what I said when it comes to what the Constitution provides.
mm.
Yeah.
So just to backtrack a bit, when reading this these acts, do you read the cybersecurity, the new one, the Cybersecurity Act itself, and then
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned also the cyber crimes one?
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was reading and I was trying to study this, I read the Cyber Security Act, the 2025, the one produced in April, and then I also read the what is more or less the Bill of
Cybercrime.
Rights, Part 3 of the Constitution.
Ah,
And then you mentioned the cyber crimes as well. So is that another aspect that people should know
also,
about?
also, sorry,
yes,
sorry to budge in, but also Zenga, there is a Data Protections Act of 2021 as well.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So all
So
of this, and then yes, sorry. I just wanted to act, and then also all of this looks like it's somewhat related. And then they within the cyber security agency, there was also the act for the. Basically, they said it's subject to the act that set up the intelligence agency of Zambia, Zambia's security intelligence agency, basically Zambia's CIA, and all of this is housed in, at least the cyber security agency is housed in the president's office.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's the latest provision. So like I mentioned, the Cyber Security and Cyber Crimes Act of 2021 is now no longer law. So that one was combined, and they decided to split it into two. So there's now the Cyber Security Act, which exists independent of the Cyber Security Act. I mean Cyber Crimes Act. So
Okay.
the Cyber Crimes Act is going to be implemented under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Then the Cyber
Mm.
Security Act will be implemented under the Ministry of Technology and Science.
Wow.
So there are
Okay.
two. And when the bills were taken into Parliament, they had two separate ministers sponsoring them. So the Minister of Science and Technology, Felix Mutati, presented the Cyber Security Bill, and the Minister of Home Affairs, Mwimbu, presented the Cyber Crimes Bill. But both were
Chuck
being
Mwimbu.
at the same time, both were passed at the same time.
Mm.
That's
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. So
that.
That's
what
interesting. Yeah.
exactly? Yeah, pretty interesting. So there's quite a lot of criminalization in both. Of course, you've pointed out an aspect of creation of a center, which is going to be under the house in the presidency. Another anomaly there. Then you have the Cyber
Mm.
Crimes Act, which also comes out with a lot. But what they have done in the Cyber Crimes Act is just take away the hate speech, which I know hate speech is being introduced in the penal code because they are amending the penal code, by the way. Um,
Yeah.
what they have done now in the cyber crimes is what I mentioned earlier. Of course, there are a lot of others. The Section 22, which brings in now the false news, which the High Court not long ago declared as something that can no longer be accepted in our country because it was going against what the Constitution provides in terms of people's freedom of expression. There is law to that effect. There's a case that was in court, the People versus
Yeah.
Magonga Chipenzi. The court said false
Mm-hmm.
news exists, but then it's been brought in the Cyber Crimes Act when it was declared null and void in the penal code. So there is that reintroduction of things that already were said this cannot exist, and then it's brought in the Cyber Crimes Act with a lot of other things, and jail terms like the publishing of false or misleading information. There is 2 years there involved. Then when you look at the Cyber Security Act itself, it's got possession of critical information, which now has also been criminalized. What that critical information is
Yeah.
something that has not been clearly defined, and it's got a sentence of imprisonment.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking about how horrible this can be, and in relation to the work that I do with journalists, especially investigative journalists, you will realize that a lot of them might fall victim, because sometimes you find yourself with information that would have been passed on to you by a source, and it's
Yeah.
information that is in public interest. But then the law tells
Mm-hmm.
you you cannot have that information because somebody will wake up and say, this is critical information. Next thing you
Yeah.
are arrested. Next thing you're slapped with
Yeah.
15.
I wanted to dive also into this because I have many questions. I think you've touched on a lot of things that we actually wanted to discuss, but
Okay.
there's this. As I was reading through the documents, there seems to be quite a lot of mention of this term, like in case of emergency, or I guess when they're investigating sort of this thing, and seems like a lot of power seems to have been given to the CMCC, which is the Central Monitoring and Coordination Center,
Absolutely.
which is interesting because I tried to Google what this center is. It's very difficult to actually find information about this, and actually, as you said, civil society has mentioned that. I think there was a publication I read as well that was done by bloggers of Zambia and other institutions that was talking about some of these concerns that you're actually talking about in 2024. And
Mm-hmm.
so with the central, and one of them was the Central Monitoring Coordination Center. Like, is there any is there any meaningful oversight of what they do, and are they accountable to anyone? And yeah, so could you tell us more about that? Is there any accountability for the CMCC, and what do they actually do? Are they a necessary force?
Yes, I think that's going to be a new establishment. I don't think
Mm-hmm,
it's in force yet. I don't think it's
mm-hmm.
been established yet.
Okay.
Uh, but when you talk about accountability, I think that's where the bigger concern has been, because you place something um, under the presidency, then those people will be accountable to the president. I think that's one thing that we said cannot happen. We should not happen, because
Mm-hmm,
uh, we do not think it would be the best approach to take. It has to be something that is going to exist independent of the presidency, so that
mm-hmm.
there is proper oversight. Other institutions will be able to speak out and raise concern if need be, if we notice that there is something that's being done which is not correct.
Yeah.
But when you place it in the highest office of the land, then it becomes extremely difficult. And again, we know there's also aspects of politics coming in the way of the presidents, which has been a norm.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the first time that things like that do happen, but I think we have seen this happening many times
Too
in our
many.
country, where you find politics really just dictating how certain things ought to be done. So somebody might be doing something just simply to please the presidency.
Yeah.
They end up abusing whatever powers they have because they want to gain certain favors from the presidency, to be seen that they are doing the correct thing. And I think we see it as something that will mostly be used against those that are very critical. It may not be someone in opposition, it may even be journalists, it
Mm-hmm.
may just be CSO actors, because we see quite a lot that will be speaking out, voicing their concerns about something which government may be doing that should not be done. But then
Yeah.
you can become a candidate of that snooping law. I call it snooping law because it's it's practically going to take away most of the privacy. I like the fact that they are saying, well, yes, it's there, but no, we're not going to do that. But come on, I don't think we're at the stage where one can listen to a politician telling you, yes, I've got this law, but I'm not going to
I'm going
use
to
it to
use
snoop on
it.
you. But then
Yeah.
the question I ask, then where you have it? If you're not
Yeah.
going to use it, then why are you going to have such a law?
Yeah. True.
No,
I
I don't think anyone can just accept that what is being said is correct. We all know that it's just talk to make somebody feel comfortable and,
mhm.
uh, be placed in a position where you think, okay, fine, there isn't anything sinister that's going to happen. That's
Yeah.
certainly not correct.
But to that point, I have again two questions. But I think the interesting thing for me was the fact that this law, I think, it was passed on April 8th, if I'm not mistaken, and not too many people knew about that until the United States actually came out with an alert, and I think that's what really
Mhm.
broke the news. But it was very funny to me because the United States is also known to be to monitor for monitoring its citizens, among many other
Mm,
things. you
mm,
know
mm.
so
Yeah.
what would you say to somebody who sort of has this mentality of, well, most governments, I mean, even quote unquote, even Western countries do it. What why shouldn't the Zambian government be able to you know monitor these things?
Mm, mm,
Yeah, what would you say? Because it seems to be. I mean, I don't think there's a single country in the world that doesn't like have some sort of ability to monitor whoever they want to. You know.
mm, mm.
So what
Also,
would you? Sorry.
also, one could even ask, hasn't this already been happening anyway? I mean,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
do
true,
have
true, true.
an
Yeah, it's
intelligence
been,
agency, like
yeah.
it already exists. The whole term of shushushus. Maybe we're just more democratic, but like perhaps this
Yeah.
has already been happening. It's just legal now. I don't know. Yeah,
Yes,
to be the
absolutely.
devil's advocate,
Yeah,
perhaps.
yeah. Yes, yes, yeah. It's been happening, but now it's been put into a law, and clearly so. And then people know about this. Um, yeah, and of course, with a lot of punitive measures that go as far as 15 years in prison, and among others. Um, you gave an example of America raising issue first. Of course, there was a lot of secrecy after
Hmm.
the bills went through third reading in the National Assembly, and they were passed and then taken to the president for signing. I think from there, really nobody knew what was going on until that very day. Um, I actually knew about them before the US Embassy issued a statement.
Really?
I knew
Yeah.
about them. I probably was among the first few people that got copies of the new act. Uh,
Hmm.
of course, I began to ask my colleagues, "Oh, are you guys aware about this?" Everyone was just shocked, like, "No, we didn't know. We didn't know." Then we checked the dates. When the signing happened, we noticed it was actually on the 8th. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the same day or a day later, after the signing, which we did not know about, MISA
Hmm.
regional chapter wrote a letter to the president urging him not to
These
sign.
are the media
Yes.
association. Yeah.
Mm.
So MISA, yes, the Media Institute of Southern Africa. So that was done late. And of course, even ourselves as Free Press Initiative, we issued a statement perhaps a week later without knowing, because we thought, well, there is this silence. He has probably not signed, but we had no idea that that was already done. It was just a matter of knowing that this is what the status is. So
It was a very
it's
secretive sort of.
extremely secretive. It's different from how the access to information was dealt with. It's also different from how the previous cyber law was dealt with. I think every step was known. Even the time that the bills were being signed, we all knew about it. But why the secrecy around this is also something that should tell you that I think we know that people are not happy with this, so we better not
Mm.
Mhm.
tell them, because if we tell them this is what's going to happen, or that we are signing it, then we will raise more issue. On the aspect of America or the American embassy bringing out whatever concerns they had. I personally don't see much issue with that. Uh, of course, they have similar laws. They do some of those things. Um, but I
The
would
National
probably
Security
say,
Agency in America.
yeah, the difference is how do they utilize them?
Yeah.
What raises concern for our jurisdictions or our countries is mostly the tendency to abuse the laws.
Mm.
That's where the big issue is. So you have a law, but someone who abuse it just to their own advantage. I will tell you also, for instance, the Public Order Act. There is, if you ask me today, I'll tell you there's nothing wrong with the Public Order Act.
Yeah.
No, there isn't. The
Mhm.
only problem is misinterpretation of the Public Order Act to suit
The
individuals in
abuse.
power.
Yeah. I mean, in the meantime, perhaps we could even talk about other laws like in the European Union, there's a famous sort of this broad-based data protection laws called
Mm-hmm.
GDPR,
Mm-hmm.
called the GDPR, and it basically regulates how monitoring activities involving personal data can be conducted in the EU and European Economic Area. So monitoring such as tracking user behavior online, but it's done via cookies, sort of analytical tools, profiling, but there's certain guidelines in which it should apply to, and there's also
Mm-hmm.
some legal basis. It has to have some sort of legal basis. So users, like when you
Exactly.
click on something, accept or don't accept cookies, for example, as to put it in the most simplest terms. Um, Monitoring may also be justified if the organization's interests outweighs the individual's rights. But this sort of like a balancing between um, particular interests and then individual rights. And
Mm.
I think one of my biggest interests, perhaps maybe we have already covered it before because of my sort of lack of internet today, um, was the potential infringement on the fundamental Bill of Rights, the Article 17, the right to privacy, including the right to privacy of communication, even. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm still kind of scratching my head over what it sort of guarantees and safety mechanisms they like sort of provided in this act. Ulano
Uh,
Mulambo Haimbe spoke and talked about interception, and I think he mentioned 22 of the Cyber Security Act, saying not any person can intercept unless with certain legal warrants, and interception is illegal. But it sounds like you're talking about people rather than the actual government. I haven't seen much about the government limiting itself specifically. So, um, yeah, no, those are just some things that I feel like
uh,
still remain question marks.
yeah, and
Yeah, Nate.
just to also dive in, because before we get into the data, yeah, I was going to discuss issues with the Data Protection Act and how it contradicts as well the current one. But before we get into that, I think there is a pressing question. I think that all Zambians are wondering about, because everywhere I go, it's there are memes of people saying, "Oh, be careful who you're texting." They're watching us, they're watching us, they're watching us, and that sort of a thing. And so the question is, can law enforcement legally record my phone call or WhatsApp message without telling me? And if so, what protections, if any, do citizens have against that misuse of power? Because when I read the act, it seems like there are these terms like in case of an emergency, or uh if there's investigation needed, paraphrasing on that part. But it seems, and also this it allows law enforcement to get an oral warrant. So like law
Mm.
enforcement can literally just say, can
What even
just
is an
obtain.
oral warrant?
Yeah, so like literally just saying, "Hey, we want to investigate this guy. We think he's doing this," and the person says, "Okay, yeah, fine." Or the person with authority says, "Fine," and that's perfectly okay. And with things such as like, oh, you can be made aware after the fact or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, are people exaggerating, or is this might actually be the case going on?
So there isn't any exaggeration on what is being said. I'll refer you to Section 56 of the Cyber Security Act, which now talks about the searches. So that particular section actually provides
Power to
for,
access, search, and seize.
pardon?
No, I'm just reading it. Reading it. Power to
Yes, the
access,
power
search,
to
and seize.
access, search, and seize. Absolutely. So Section 56, subsection 1 talks about doing that with a warrant. But in the same section, in subsection 3, talks about an inspector doing that without a warrant. The same section. So despite subsection 1, an inspector may, without a warrant, conduct an information security audit on critical information infrastructure, or an electronic communication system accessible in the public domain. So it's about, you know, someone uh, being given a lot of powers to do something that suits them at a particular moment. And I think what people are saying is actually justified.
Hmm.
And it's from such provisions that the American embassy said, hey, this is what's going on.
Yeah.
There aren't adequate safeguards. And I like what you said. Are people protected? And I'll tell you, both the Cyber Security Act and the Cyber Crimes Act do not have adequate safeguards.
Hmm.
So much as we can say, yes, this law, when somebody just reaches in a hurry without paying a lot of attention or scrutinizing each of those provisions, you actually say, no, there's nothing wrong here.
Hmm.
But there are a lot of issues there. It can seem okay, but scrutinize it deeply, you will discover there are some hidden things that are so messy.
Mm.
That's number two.
Yeah.
We are an extremely petty country, like
Hmm.
really, really petty. You would
Hmm.
just like maybe the work that I do. Then the next thing is you want to see, who do I talk to?
Hmm.
Uh, who am I always in touch with? I find myself with something, the next thing the Cyber Security Act, or I mean, cyber crimes or Cyber Security Act are being used against that particular individual. It now goes beyond the penal code, which already has funny provisions, which are extremely odd, like sedition. Oh, you're found with this and slap with sedition, all
Yeah.
that kind of
Archaic
stuff.
laws.
So, yeah, exactly. So now we are bringing it into these laws. Why? Because we have realized that, or they have realized, I'm not part of them that's coming up with these crazy laws. They have realized that there's a lot of freedom now, which we were not able to get outside of the cyberspace. And I'll give
Mm.
you some little background. You will notice that a lot of countries in Southern Africa are coming up with these cyber laws. Eh?
Oh, I didn't know that. I was not aware of that.
Yes, a number of them are.
Really?
Yes, so Lesotho, for now, their cybersecurity bill um, is still before a parliamentary committee. So
Hmm.
when Zambia went a step further and came up with what it has done, they even wrote an article advising that Lesotho should not go, they should not take the same route that Zambia has taken in terms of coming up with these laws that are going to alarm the citizens, the laws that are obviously going to affect people's freedoms.
Hmm.
Yeah, so several other countries are doing that. And this was based on some meeting the leaders had, where they spoke about the freedoms people are enjoying in the cyberspace. And they had to come up with a way to curtail that freedom somehow. Let's come up with
Wow. You mean
laws.
like SADC leaders came together, or do you mean the Lesotho leaders? Sorry.
No, not Lesotho, SADC leaders. So it's
Wow.
one country after another. Of course, they were discussing a number of things, and then they discussed how they felt it was important to begin to regulate the cyberspace.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
There is
Wow.
that background. So it's not an accident. It's not coincidence that most of them are coming up with these laws. It's not.
This is really interesting. I
So
had
there
no
is that
idea.
Yeah.
there is that drive. And of course, when you are outside of the power or outside of the government, everything about them will be wrong. Until you get in, then you realize, okay, I think I can use these laws also to my own advantage. I mean, we do have our own example, and we have no problem at all saying one thing and coming to do a totally different thing the next minute.
Yeah. And
So
before,
that's a background, because the time that
yeah.
all this agreement was being made, or this realization by the leaders was being made, we had we had Edgar Lungu in power. He's no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
No, he's not. But we've remained with this. And instead of making things better, we're actually making it even worse than what we had. I don't think this is what people this is what people need. And I always say it is it is always important to put people first when you're making laws. Never try to come up with a law because you feel you need the protection of that particular law when you are in power.
Yeah,
The
and
biggest question
But
is,
also, I think that
if I may, I think you're touching on a question. One of
right.
my final question actually, Zenga, before you get in, like as we talked about in the beginning of this podcast, that Haka in the HLMA was literally like that was one of the things said. This is the first law that I'm going to repeal when I come into power, and he echoed some of the things that we're discussing right now. He said they want to use these laws to basically monitor us. They want to use these laws, but he said he wants to bring freedom because this is how we're going to help people. This is how doctors can use the internet to help even people who are very far away, etc., etc. But now, and you've touched on this, he's changed his mind, and instead we've got an even more stronger, cyber security act that arguably isn't in the interest of the people. So, and you mentioned this thing that's going on in SADC that I had no idea that happened. So, what do you think has changed politically, and why? Like, why now? Like, what has really motivated this shift?
yeah, the biggest motivation mostly, I think, is um, the desire to protect the hold on power.
Mhm.
That's always been the motivation, really. When you see the amount of dissent that people will express, usually they use the cyberspace.
Mhm.
Because right now, I mean, if I am saying, or if I'm going to say I am not happy with something and I want to protest, I don't think the police will agree that I go ahead, even when I know it's within my rights to do that. They will come up with their own explanations using the Public Order Act, which, like I mentioned, is being abused. So where I'm only supposed to notify the police are interpreting it to say you have to write for permission, so we give you a permit. It's not supposed to be that way. It's
Mhm.
only notification. Those are two different things. A notice and an application for a permit are totally different things. And what the law provides for is a notification. So they will not allow me to do what my rights entail. The only thing I can think about is, okay, fine, let me express myself in the cyberspace. But now that's a space that unfortunately is going to be shut. Uh, I feel somehow somebody felt, okay, what we had then, which was passed in 2021, was not as strong because people could still enjoy their freedoms. So you would literally go and say whatever, of course, as long as you're not insulting and what. But
Mhm.
now there are all these other things, false news, critical information, and whatnot. So anything you try to say, one might connect it to something that has been provided for somehow in both the Cyber Security Act and the Cyber Crimes Act. So it becomes really difficult. It's about now watching over, um, I can't say my shoulder. I mean, that's cyberspace. Like you just literally hold your fingers and say, well, let me not say this because I don't know what provision will be used if I say this, or if I reveal to say, oh, there is this information, is anybody aware? Now, one of the craziest again is that provision which talks about publicizing the fact that you have been invited maybe for questioning over a cyber related offense. So if I've been written to and say, oh, we need you for something like this, and then I go online and talk about it, it's another offense. Really?
Really?
Of course,
What?
yes, it's there. Yes.
So it's an offense
Yeah.
to notify that you have
Uh-huh.
been
And
questioned.
go and talk
for
about it,
writing something in the cyberspace.
it's another offense. So when they tell you there is this, we are
That's
maybe
very
investigating and we
interesting.
need you, you come, you are not supposed to talk about it. So
That's a
that
very
Wow.
is that
interesting
that
thing.
yeah, exactly. Then that comes with a 5-year imprisonment, and they're saying disclosing cybercrime summons or police call-outs. Now that has also been criminalized. So
Wow.
are you telling
Wow.
me that I can wake up and say this has been done with good intentions? I
So
don't
no one
think
is
so.
because
Because
if that is there, then no one is supposed to know that something
you
is
have been
happening to you,
summoned.
then,
Exactly. Thank you.
which is a very
So
frightening.
yes. So
Wow.
anything happens to me and I'm done, I will not even alert anybody, because if I alert my army, they'll be speaking from all parts of the world. Oh, this is what's going on, and then I'll be slapped with another offense. I mean, that's the
Mm,
craziness, and that's why you see people talking.
Wow.
So
yeah.
it's not that Zambians are uneducated. It's not that Zambians are unable to read what is provided in those laws. I think it would be an insult to think that Zambians don't know what is contained in there. They do, because I know that a lot of Zambians are extremely educated and they're able to tell. You don't need to be a lawyer. I am a lawyer myself, and I'm an advocate of the High Court. Yes, um, but every Zambian, every citizen who's able to read and write is able to tell that there's everything wrong in some of those provisions that have been put in those two laws.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think. Yeah. Go ahead, Nathan.
No, no, no. I was just, I'm just really in shock. Like, I, there are a lot of things I didn't know about, like the meeting in Sadik for me, and also the fact that even just reporting now and saying, "Hey, the police have done this to me,"
Yeah.
is
Mhm.
it's that's really,
For
really,
me,
really alarming.
And
You
oh,
know.
and there's another one, by the
for
way.
me, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Zenge. There's another one which talks about attempting to
Okay.
incite ethnic divisions. That comes with life imprisonment.
Alive.
Life,
Yes, yes, exactly. Life. Mm.
ethnic. So how do you define? I mean, I get hate speech. I get hate speech that I understand, but attempting to incite ethnic divisions, what counts for that to even be life? Like that is very long. Like that's
Yeah,
now
I
the
Exactly.
highest
mean,
the highest
cause
Exactly.
like
ordinary punishment. Now that death sentence is gone for most.
Now that's going to be interpreted by the law enforcers. Already we have seen a number of people. Of course, you know which people. It is not the first
Yeah.
time. Even in the previous government, you would have certain figures every time. They are the ones who are reporting John, James, Edgar, whoever. They are reporting them
Yeah.
to the police for whatever they feel is a criminal act that has been done.
Mhm.
Let's talk about what's happening again. It's a continuation. Remember, I mentioned nothing has
Mhm.
changed. We still have
Mhm.
certain individuals, same individuals, that will be reporting Mary, Jane, and whoever for whatever.
Yeah.
So that individual can come up and say, oh, Zenge did something that I believe can incite ethnic divisions. Then they go and report you to Minilunga police.
Yeah.
Next,
And
Zenge is
and
summoned to
probably
Mwinilunga. You
it's
don't even live in Mwinilunga, by the way. You travel all the way. Then they will, they will hold
yeah.
you there. They will, and you will not talk about it, because if you do,
yeah,
Mhm.
again, you're going to
be
get
slapped
another.
with yes, disclosing cybercrime summons and whatever. So
But
people will not
Yeah.
I
exactly.
really, I really think the punishment doesn't fit the crime.
Not at all.
Like yes, I've seen, like, especially in previous elections, like ethnic uh statements that were made that were very hurtful and things like that. But I wouldn't want those people to spend time in prison. Like
I think
that to me is way too much, because even in this bill itself, you're looking at time from 2 to 10 years in
yeah,
prison.
it's a
And
long time.
yeah, that's really alarming.
I
It's
think I
it's
think
it's really alarming.
for me, I really like I'm obsessed with like detail, and the lack of detail in this act even I think I was probably the cut off that time because of my internet. The length of that list of what counts for critical information, from health to mining to security to defense, and then any other kind of information. And then even when you say everything that is written, and then there are the contradictory nature where the power of search and seizure, several laws that talk about how, you know, everything should have a warrant, should have legal procedure, and then the last one says actually they can also do it without a warrant for such and such reasons. So to me it's just very, and I think you're right, you don't necessarily have to be a professor in legal philosophy and Zambian legal history to understand some of the confusion I have in reading this. There's no the detail, the amount, with more detail I feel like you have more guarantees, more exceptions, more nuance. Like there's nothing wrong with
Exactly.
having a cybersecurity law, as we have mentioned in other countries, but there's just too much to the interpretation of who is there. And Zambia's history has seen sometimes law is just interpreted by who is in power um, at that time. And even if you trust the current administration right now, there's still possibility that one day you will not trust the future one, or the
Exactly.
future one might be good and the one after that might be bad. And then another aspect that I also was a bit confused by, that I was actually talking to Nathan about here, was the different agencies and authorities. And like, if let's say you post something on Facebook, who is going to actually come to your house? Because in this act, there's the Central Monitoring and, no, first they mentioned the Zambia Cyber Security Agency, which is in the office of the president, subject to the Intelligence Act from 19 that set up Zambia's version of the CIA, right? And then there's the Zambia Cyber Incident Response Team, and then there's the Central Monitoring and Coordination Center. So what's the power structure here? Like is who does what, and who has the enforcing capability? So would I expect like some guy in glasses, some like Zambian IT nerd coming to my um, house if I post something bad, or should I just expect a normal policeman? And who, you know? So I'm just seeing a number of different authorities and agencies, and like what they do. Um, so I don't know. In short, from what I have gathered, the Central Monitoring Coordination Center, CMCC, is basically supposed to be the national nerve center of real-time monitoring, coordinates information, supports emergency response to national threats, and has a role in surveillance. And the Zambia Incident Response Team is like more technical for detecting, analyzing, and mitigating cyber incidents. So the hairs are very thin here also. Like
Yeah.
the duties are very, investigation, security breaches, cyber attacks. I guess maybe if Zesco is hacked, for example, I think if used properly, that's why they're there, right? So it's critical infrastructure. And then three, Zambia's Cyber Security Agency. This is like, from what I read, is like the big one that oversees all of it, the overarching regulatory and enforcement body created by the Act, which implements provisions of the Cyber Security Act, license, monitors, and then penalizes. National policy on cybersecurity also is what they are responsible for, and the Cybercrimes Act is also, oh, that's under the Home Office. Okay, yeah. This is what I've just like briefly understood from these, but I don't know. They just seem to be doubling down on the same thing, in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing.
I don't know what.
I
Yeah,
think some of these
yeah.
things are really just done in a hurry. Like I mentioned, we needed a bit more time. Um, to just have a lot of stakeholder input. For instance, just what you are raising. I don't think there's any need to have all those three separate entities existing all to enforce what is contained in the Cyber Security Act or the Cyber Crimes Act. I don't think so. So might even end up having a replication of duties. So you have same people doing almost the same thing. But of course, there's one that clearly, talks about surveillance and whatever. And I think that's where now I am drawing my powers to call it a snooping law because we are going to have that institution that's going to be doing that surveillance.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I mean, the bigger concern, of course, is the same issue that we talked about, where a warrant can be obtained, and that is done without any proper safeguards at all. And I think that's where the major concern is, like we mentioned. So the aspect
Mhm.
of privacy then becomes a major issue. I mean, it's it takes me back to what I
Yeah.
said, where I said we are we are or we can be an extremely petty country at times. So one can be under
Mhm.
surveillance for not doing anything serious that requires surveillance, but simply because
Yeah.
they're focal, they're critical, and you begin now to get even information that doesn't even concern the public interest, because I think that should be the overriding principle here.
Yeah.
So if it's, for
Mhm.
instance, just me talking to uh, a guy I like, the next thing,
Yeah.
some be like just seeing all that, they will not even be interested. I don't think that's public interest, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm.
someone
Yeah.
might just want
Zambia
that
would not die
data
if you do not see
for a
those
certain,
messages.
yes, for a certain moment when they want to just be so petty and say, oh, after all, this person who speaks a lot, look at what, you know, that
Mm.
that's that's now like really crazy. But if there
Yeah.
is serious criminality, then it takes us to those other countries that you referred to earlier, where they have similar laws or they do those things. But how are they using those laws? They are
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
stopping crime. But if the
Organized
crime
crime,
to be
pedophile
about,
rings, and so
oh
on.
yes, if it's about me speaking out and say, oh, there is this wrong thing that's about to happen and we need to stop this, and you speak about it, then someone will say this is a crime, then it becomes a serious problem. And I think that's
Yeah.
the intention um, these laws are sort of trying to do. And of course, we are talking about having it just a year before the elections. We saw a similar thing being done in 2021. There was that rush.
Mm-hmm.
Even with
Mm.
all the advice that was being given, no one could listen. They rushed and had the cyber law and whatever, which obviously led us to not having internet at some point during the elections because they
I
didn't
was just
want
going to mention that. Yeah.
exactly. So that kind of thing. I mean, what stops somebody from doing that in the next election if there's going to be a little bit of heat online and then we have all these laws? Maybe people might not even say because they'll be scared with the laws
Yeah.
that we have. I don't think one would wake up and begin to talk about those things
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
in the manner that one would be expected to express themselves on matters that do concern the public, matters that are of interest to the wider public in our country.
Yeah. And I think also, as you mentioned, the internet shutdown. I think the average Zambian, um, like Gen Z or late millennials, are very used to a degree of freedom. And I mean, Zambia has been ranked relatively well compared to other African countries in terms of democracy index and things like that. But I think a lot of it we take for granted. Um, and Zambia doesn't really like protesting uh, physically, and now probably online. And the internet shutdown, the arrest of the current president himself when he was in opposition for treason,
Mm,
is good examples of how that democracy or the gains that I think previous generations in the 90s and 80s made can easily be shattered. Um, and yeah, I think it's a very sobering thought. Um, and how it will be applied to be something everyone will have to really watch, because now it's sort of like it's already done, although unless someone will challenge it in court with regards to the Bill of Rights. But yeah, I think it leaves for a lot of sober thought. And
mm,
yeah, I
yeah.
don't know. Yeah, if you have any, Nathan, if you have any parting shots, or
No, I
Joanne,
think
maybe.
I think I think I got all my questions answered. I think it's quite concerning. To be honest, I kind of came into this podcast a little bit lightly, but I'm leaving this a bit heavy hearted, to be very honest. Um,
Mm,
because it's very scary, because anybody can be caught up in that. And also, you're not talking about fines. If this issue was about like fines, yes, you can argue, like I would argue about the freedom, but you're talking about 10 years to life in prison, 2 years to life in prison,
That's not
and
a joke, yeah.
already Zambia has an issue with overcrowding prison population. The prison population, like the state of the prisons in Zambia, is not good, and you're already
Man,
and
just need to be
in
there
there
and
are people who are waiting for their cases to be heard as well. And now
Yeah.
you're
yes,
exacerbating the situation by doing this.
yeah. I
It's
mean, it's
it's
not
Yeah.
re-
uncommon to
it
find someone waiting for 5 years in prison. Then you just add like
yeah,
a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old who said something on Facebook. Just add them
yeah,
to that pile.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, to me, I honestly don't see the sense in it, because I think if you're doing a good job politically, you don't need to focus on these things. If you're not, you know what I mean. Like, I think it's really alarming, and the fact that it's now even something that was thought about with all SADC leaders is also really quite alarming, because to me
I think,
personally, I
yeah,
think when I think of SADC, it's like SADC is, relatively speaking, of course, is relatively free. You know, of course, it's
compared to
not
the
as
continent, yeah.
compared to other parts of the continent. It's relatively free, but now it seems like we're being taken back to another period and era, and
I think, I think,
that's
I
alarming for
think
me.
I think this bill, as I said before, like I wish it just had so much more detail and
Mm,
more exemptions, more exclusions, because I see the need to have some kind of ability to intercept people with incredibly nefarious means. But how you define nefarious, again, detail, what is national interest? Like I gave an example, okay, if Zesco has been hacked, all right, that's a good example of how you can come and okay fire in the incident report response team, and that would be a
yes.
crime. I
Mm,
wouldn't be surprised if they say there's a group of men that are, we have heard about the incidents of child defilement and child rape. If there's online groups that are promoting or like they actually even organize these things, human
mm,
trafficking, makes
mm,
sense. But
yes.
the vastness of the law and just how sweeping it seems to be, I can't put my finger on how exactly I can support
Yeah.
this act.
Yeah. No, I agree with you actually. We need laws to regulate conduct online, but the bigger thing should be ensuring that these laws do not just affect people's fundamental freedoms.
Yeah,
So
Yeah,
yeah,
it should target real criminality, in short.
very
But
yeah,
true.
what we have does not have those adequate safeguards to ensure that people's freedoms are protected. That's not there.
yeah,
The exceptions you talked about, also that's not there. So we can have this, but what's the exception? For instance, I talked about journalists. I think they do very important work, which even government benefits from.
Precisely.
yeah.
So
Well,
we need some of those exceptions.
Yeah,
yeah,
Yeah.
precisely.
So yeah, I think that's where our issue has been. Not that we're saying we should completely not have anything of this sort. No, I mentioned, gave examples of some of those provisions, which I believe are really good, because we need children protected online. That is, it cannot be under contention. No one can dispute that. Everybody is in agreement. We need those protections. Everyone is in agreement that we need to stop human trafficking, because most of them use the cyberspace. So we have those provisions in there. Yes, they are good, but if we're going to have a provision that will stop me from publishing something, maybe I'm a whistleblower, I publish something,
corruption.
when it's true, someone will wake up and say, oh, we are done here, we have been exposed. Hey, can you just charge them with publication of false news
Yeah,
or
Yeah,
whatever, as provided for in section 22 of the cybercrimes law? Then there is everything wrong, because clearly
yeah,
we might get there, and that's why we are raising this. We don't want to sit and begin to see these things and say, oh, we should have said it. We're saying it because we don't want it to be used in such a way. The best would be we raise issue, we blow the whistle and say this is what we see in these laws, so people are aware, so that you're
yeah,
not
yeah,
caught off guard when you begin to see people being questioned, or you might not even know actually that people are being questioned. The next thing you just hear is that, oh, Oh, but John is serving a 5 year sentence.
Yeah.
How? When did
Yeah.
this happen? You totally have
Yeah.
no idea. I mean, that's what is there, unfortunately. So that's the
Yeah.
reason why we're making this noise. And we're not going to stop to make this noise. Of course, we know it might take forever to see them being amended because, it's a process. Like, you just have a law which is just been passed a week or so ago, and you don't expect to see some further amendments in the next month or two or even a year. It takes a long time.
It's for the
Then,
long haul.
yeah, now what's going to happen between now and maybe the next amendment? Heaven knows. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
somebody else who's going to come in might actually make them even worse. I mean, we
Yeah.
can say that
Yeah.
because we're coming from that background where we had something bad and now it's worse than what it was. So it might
Yeah.
even get worse than what it already is. Well, unfortunately, that's probably, I should say, the African thing. I need to have a law that's going to protect me because I have the power. So I don't want anybody saying anything about me. I have the power. But then what happens when you leave power? Or, for example, maybe the question I can ask is, if you were not in power, would you let whoever it is that's in power pass such kind
That's
of a law?
such. Yeah. Yeah.
The answer would be a no, and I think we already have
We already
answers.
have the
Those
answer
posts
in this
and
case.
everything. So yeah, I mean, we have that, and I think it's just best to always give it a second thought.
Yeah.
Always give it a
Yeah.
second thought. I'm doing this, yes, and there are people that I am doing this for. Now, if the people you're doing this for are saying no, we're not happy with this, then why have it?
Yeah.
Mm.
Very
Exactly.
Yeah.
true.
So
And I think
I think
that's a really good place
before me
to.
opening.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you have another question, but I wanted to just ask her about
No,
like
okay.
if uh if you wish if you could be like, and we asked this, we'll ask this quite a few of our guests, um if you could have um if you could have been asked a question, or a question that you have never been asked before with regards to your work and what you stand for, um what question would it be, and why?
A question?
Yeah, if you're,
Oh,
what type of question would you like to be asked, like a question that you've never been asked before? What would it be, and why? Why would you want to be asked that question?
hmm. Maybe a question like, what do you stand for?
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah,
So
because
yeah, what do you what do you stand for?
well, I stand for truth, I stand for fairness, and I stand for credibility. I think those three things really matter most to me. Um, yeah,
Wonderful.
because
That's
truth is something that it just never changes. Unlike a lie, there's mostly
mm,
people that will tell a lie, will forget they had told that lie. So the next time they'll try and say something, and people never forget. They'll always, remind you, like, hey, no, but you had said something like this. So, but the moment you say the truth, you always stick to that truth because that's the truth. That's what is there. Credibility, I mean, it just defines the person. Who are you? I mean, what do people relate you with?
mm,
And it just distinguishes you from a lot of other things that go on where it becomes really just hard to trust individuals in our modern world. And especially in my profession, well, I speak mostly as a journalist and not so much as a lawyer. So there's quite a
mm.
lot that's been said about where journalism is and the conduct and things like that. And I think that what keeps you going is just that credibility that you attracted to yourself from the moment you started practicing. And I think that's something that I have held on to for over 20 years of my practice as a journalist. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was a great answer, and I think that was a great point to end it at. To encourage our listeners to pursue truth and to stand for your principles and not to back down. So I just like to thank you, Joan, for joining us and for really shedding a lot of light on this bill. And yeah,
It's
to
the
our
act. It's the
oh, it's
act.
act. Sorry, sorry.
No longer bill.
I always use those interchangeably for some
I know
reason.
we talked about the bills quite a lot, so it's easy
Yeah,
to, yeah.
to confuse the
It's
two. Yeah,
law now.
yeah. So thank you so much for joining us, and yeah, to our listeners, see you guys on the next episode.
I am an African.